Chapter 10. A Tale of 3 Lives. "Apologise?" asked the old man, sounding confused. He was holding out a hand for me to shake, but he smelt bad and I was sure his hands were like super dirty, so I just gave him a wave instead. "No worries," he said. "You don't have to shake hands if you don't want to." Then slowly the old man's eyes began to get wider and wider. "Hold on," he said. "You're the boy, the one who pushed my trolley into the lake." "Well, he's come to say sorry," explained Maylie, reaching out to touch the sleeve of the old man's coat. "Yeah, I'm sorry," I said, trying to look how I imagined being sorry looked. "And it was an accident," I added truthfully. "An accident?" shouted the old man, his whole face becoming blotchy and purple as a beetroot. "You mean to tell me I didn't see you go up to my bench, grab the handle of my trolley, run off down the hill with it until it crashed to the lake?" "No, well, I mean, yes. I pushed the trolley away from the bench," I said, "but I just wanted to hide it in the trees, but I kind of lost control of it." "So apparently he didn't mean to push it in the lake," clarified Maylie, like a judge in a courtroom. Thomas shook his head and he stroked his beard angrily. "Well, I don't believe him. I've seen him around and I've seen what he does to the other kids. He's a bully, a lost cause. Worse than that, he's a bully who thinks it'll make him look good to go messing with a homeless guy's most precious possessions." He took a step closer. "Isn't that right, boy? Aren't you just a plain old bully?" I glared back at the old man. My legs began to tremble and my ears felt like they were going to pop right off like 2 rocket launchers. "Yeah, well, at least I'm not a thief," I screamed. "What did you say, boy?" asked the old man as Maylie stared at me in confusion. "You heard me," I shouted. "I saw you on Saturday night next to the fountain, Piccadilly Circus. And now I've found you, I'm going to tell the police and tell them it was you. You're the thief that everyone's looking for." The old man gazed down at me with a blank face and then turned to Maylie, asked, "Is he off his rocker?" "I'm not off anything. I saw you in exactly the same coat and with your beard and everything," I shouted. "You even had your hat on." "My hat?" asked the old man, pulling the hat off his head and looking down at it. I frowned because something was different. His hair looked much darker than it had been on Saturday night, but then I realised it just must have looked lighter, and then because of all the light from the screens... Yeah, you were wearing the exact same hat, probably another thing that you stole," I added, "along with all those priceless statues." The old man looked at Maylie again, and then at me, and then at his tent, and finally started to laugh. "Lord, that's a good one. Me? Statue thief? He actually thinks I'm the statue thief." Falling quiet, he suddenly grabbed me by the arms. "Boy," he whispered, bringing his face so close to mine that I had to turn away from the smell. "You think if I had stolen a load of plonking big statues, I'd be living like this?" He turned round so that I could see his bag and his tent, which I now noticed had holes all over it. "This is my home, and this is where I was on Saturday night, not near some blasted fountains." I wanted to move away, but his grip on my arms was too strong. "Here," he said, standing back up straight and taking something small, square and brown out of his pocket. He tossed it to me, but I missed and it fell on the floor in front of my feet. "Go on, take a look. See the 2 reasons I'd never steal anything." Maylie watched me with narrowed eyes as I picked up the object from the floor, and it was a wallet. It was just like the one my dad had, except instead of being filled with money and credit cards, it was stuffed with pieces of newspaper and paper and cuttings. I held it up and the wallet fell open. On one side was a clear plastic window that showed a faded piece of pink card. It was half burnt on the bottom. On the bit that wasn't burnt was a photo of Thomas that must have been taken like 100 years ago, when he had lots of curly hair on his head and his face had been clean shaven, and above the photo were the words UK driving licence. Number 1, Chilvers. Number 2, Thomas Benjamin, Doctor. 1st of the 1st, 1976, United Kingdom. And opposite it, underneath another cracked bit of plastic, was an old photo that looks as if it had been folded and unfolded at least 1,000 times, and it showed a woman with short red hair kissing a baby's bald head, and the baby was laughing at the camera with both of its hands in its mouth. "Who are they?" I asked, pointing to the woman and the baby. "They're my 2 reasons. I would rather live on the streets and have them be proud of me than ever live the life of a thief," said Thomas, snatching his wallet out of my hand, and he gently put it back in the pocket inside his coat. "Maylie, get him out of here," he said, turning from me and waving us away. "Don't ever bring him back. I don't want little snots like him making fun of me, throwing my things around and then coming here and insulting me to my face." I'm sorry, Thomas," Maylie said softly. "I really thought he wanted to apologise." Grabbing me by the sleeve, she ordered, "Come on." But before pulling me away, she stopped and took something wrapped in tin foil out of her rucksack. "Dad sent you this. It's your favourite," she said to Thomas, putting it on top of the sleeping bag. "Chocolate spread and banana." The old man gave her a nod, but still didn't look at me. As we hurried back out of the trees and towards the lake, Maylie said, "So I guess you never wanted to say sorry to him at all, did you?" "Yeah, I did," I said, stopping in the middle of the path in front of her. "No," said Maylie, shaking her head. "You just wanted to accuse him of being the statue thief." "Well, I did see him there," I argued, "and I think we should tell the But Maylie didn't even get me any further. "Don't even think about it. I know Thomas. I know he would never, ever steal anything. So you just leave him alone, all right? And leave me and everyone else alone too." Pushing me away with both of her hands, she stormed off up the hill. "But wait! Who was that woman and the baby in the photo, and why was he so mad about losing his stupid trolley anyway?" Maylie ground to a halt. Slowly she turned around, breathing so hard through her nostrils that I wouldn't have been surprised if flames had come out of them, and she marched right up to me. "That photo is of Thomas's wife and his baby daughter," she said, shouting at me as though I wasn't standing right in front of her. "They died in a car crash years and years ago, and Thomas was driving the car." "Is that why he became, I asked. "You mean homeless?" asked Maylie, not yelling now, but somehow sounding angrier. "It's not a dirty word, I wanted to tell her that the word might not be dirty, but Thomas definitely was, but I knew she wouldn't answer any of my questions if I did. "So, why did he become homeless then?" I asked. "Because sometimes people can't take sadness. Not when they love someone and they die. They just get too sad." Calming down, Maylie sighed. "At least that's what my dad says, and that's what's happened to Thomas. He felt sad and alone, and there was no one to help him. He got so sad he lost his job, and then he lost his house, and then he was sleeping in a car, but he lost that too. So he ended up sleeping on the streets." "Oh," I said, feeling my nose begin to run for no reason. I wiped it with the back of my sleeve. "That's why he lives in this park, and why he loves that bench," Maylie carried on. "That's where he used to sit with his wife. Are you satisfied now?" Shrugged. "And as for your last question, that trolley was full of newspapers. Thomas collects them from all the dustbins in the park. He takes them to the recycling centre and they give him money for it. That's how he makes enough money to buy food every day. But it also had something else in it." "What?" I asked. "Plastic bags?" Maylie shook her head. "No, not just plastic bags. There was a photo album right at the bottom of the trolley, and it was full of pictures of his wife and daughter." I know he's not ever going to get it back because of you. I looked over Maylie's shoulder to the lake and I felt my nose run so heavily that I needed both of my sleeves to dry it, and there was a long silence. Don't go near him again, said Maylie finally, looking down at the floor instead of me. He doesn't deserve anyone who's not going to be nice to him. I should never have taken you to see him, because you're not just a bully, you're a liar too. And with that, Maylie walked away, her head high, leaving me standing alone, staring at Thomas's old bench. Chapter 11. The Thin Blue Line. The next morning, I avoided the park on my way to school. I didn't want to think about what Maylie or Thomas or the questions that had kept popping into my head all night. I arrived early and I waited for Will at our usual wall, scowling at anyone who dared to look at me until he joined me. "Hey, did you hear what happened last night?" asked Katie, suddenly appearing from the crowds and running up to us. Me and Will looked at each other in surprise. "How come you're so early today, Katie?" Will asked. Katie shrugged. "My brother gave me a lift." We didn't say anything. Katie hated anyone making a fuss, even when her half-brother, who lived in another country, had come home and given her a lift to school for the first time in years. "Anyway, did you hear?" asked Katie again. "The thief stole Tinkerbell. I just heard it on the news in the car." "Tinkerbell?" asked Will, looking at Katie as if she'd gone completely mad. "Yeah, you know, like Tinkerbell from Peter Pan," said Katie. "There was a tiny gold statue of her outside the famous children's hospital, you know, Great Ormond Street, and the yellow marks, they were left everywhere again." "If I was the thief, I would have just taken the vending machine," said Will. "Why?" asked Katie. Will shrugged. "Sweets, crisps and stuff. It's a load better than some weird fairy statue." "Do you know if they got any pictures of the thief on the CCTV camera or anything?" I asked. Katie shook her head. "Nah, nothing again. But the head of the police was on the radio and he said they were going to start rounding up homeless people for questioning. That means they suspect them because of the yellow signs. And then Mayor Bainbridge came on and said he was going to help to get all the criminals off the streets by making a new law. Hey, Will, how would you steal a vending machine anyway?" She narrowed her eyes. "Who's that new boy?" I wanted to ask Katie what else she'd heard on the radio, but I could tell she wasn't really listening anymore. She was too busy staring at a boy with a shiny new rucksack and imagining how much pocket money he was going to give us. I followed Katie and Will as they both ran after him. But all through class and even at lunch, as I smashed trays into people's chests and took sweets and money from kids as usual, I was feeling a bit strange. No matter how much I didn't want to think about them, Thomas and the pictures in his wallet just kept popping up in the back of my mind like a jack-in-the-box. By last break, I was feeling so strange that I let Randy go before he'd even had a chance to pay us. That was when I realised there must be something seriously wrong with me. "Here, are you ill?" asked Will, as we watched Randy running away from us with a look of happy shock on his face. "Yeah, I think I might be," I said. My insides felt like fruit getting mashed up in a blender. "Ugh, well, don't give anything to us," said Katie, covering her mouth and taking a step back from me. "Don't worry, I won't," I said, suddenly wishing I could make her and Will disappear. "It's that Maylie, isn't it?" said Katie. "She's making you ill. She keeps staring at you weirdly in class." I was about to tell her that she was wrong when the bell began to ring, but as we walked back to class and sat at our tables, I spotted Maylie staring at me with a funny look on her face, just like Katie had said. She quickly looked away when she saw I'd noticed. I waited for her to look back at me again so I could silently tell her to leave me alone, when Mrs. Vergra shouted, "Right, class, listen up, everybody. Instead of reading time today, we've got something special. We've got some guests coming in to talk about a rather big issue facing our city at the moment. And that's the issue of crime." Instantly, a whole classroom of eyeballs swivelled over to me and Will and Katie. I narrowed my eyes and gave everyone a death stare. Now, as you will all have heard, London is currently unfortunately being vandalised by a thief or a gang of thieves who are going around stealing very precious objects. Objects that belong to the public, said Miss Vergara. The invisible thief, cried out Nelson from behind me. Well, yes, that is one name for him or her, smiled Mrs. Vergara, amongst others, but we all know that no one can ever really be invisible, don't we? Nelson nodded, but looked disappointed at the news. Now, the Mayor of London and the police are trying their very best to catch this thief, and they would like to teach us how to become more vigilant. She went to the classroom door and opened it, and 2 police officers walked in. Everyone immediately sat up straight and tried to look as if they'd never done a single bad thing in their whole of their lives. Officers? All yours, said Mrs. Vergara, nodding at them as they went and stood by the whiteboard. After Officers Philip and Miriam had wasted everyone's time trying to be cool and funny, they finally started to talk about the one thing that we actually all wanted to know about, the invisible thief. Except, well, they didn't really tell us anything. All they said were things like, any kind of crime needs to be tackled by all of us as a community. And they said, theft of any property will not be tolerated by the police. And they said, your city is our city, so it's up to all of us to protect it. After a while, I stopped listening until I heard Officer Miriam say, so, there you have it. She was pointing to what she'd written on the whiteboard. If you see anything strange, just remember, Pop-Tarts. Person, object, place. Time, alarm, report, truth and safety. Okay? Now, who'd like to ask us a question? Nearly everyone's hands shot up into the sky like arrows being fired straight in the sky. How come you haven't caught the thief yet? Can he really make himself invisible? Why are all the signs in yellow? Are you going to arrest everyone who's homeless? Is the thief homeless? Where's he putting the soul and stuff? How much is Paddington Bear worth? After telling us that no one could become invisible and that homeless people weren't going to be arrested just for being homeless and that they had no idea how much Paddington Bear was worth, Officer Philip turned to Rajesh, who was making squeaking noises and reaching up so high he looked like he was about to dislocate his whole arm. Yes, son, what's your question? Rajesh dropped his arm on the table with a thump, said, Are big issue sellers needed for questioning too? Because there's 3 of them next to my mum's office. Now, I found Rajesh saying big issue in his snotty voice funny, so I muttered out loud, more like big tissue sellers. And that made Katie and Will laugh, and someone else behind me start to giggle. Officer Miriam frowned at me, and I looked down quickly at my hands and pretended not to see her. Do you think this is funny, son? Asked Officer Philip. I could tell he was staring at me too, even though I couldn't see him. Instantly, the whole class fell quiet to see what I would do next. I'm not your son, I said to the table. From somewhere in front of me, I heard Mrs. Vergara sigh loudly. What's your name, Sonny? Asked Officer Philip, who took a few steps forward and stopped in front of my desk. Rajesh gave another squeak and tried to move as far away from me as possible. I looked up at Officer Philip's big light bulb-shaped nose and I replied, Hector. Hector what? Asked Officer Philip. No, Hector Landis, I said, making myself want to laugh. Got ourselves a clever clogs here, have we? Said Officer Philip, shaking his head. Someone who thinks it's smart to cross the thin blue line. Yeah, well, I'm smarter than you, I replied before I could even help myself. Everyone gasped, and someone at the back of the class whispered, Ooh. Folding his arms, Officer Philip tilted his head to one side. How do you figure that one out then, young man? He asked. I glanced around the room. Not a single person seemed to be breathing, and even Mrs. Vergara's fringe looked like it was leaning forwards to see what I was going to say next. I could see Maylie narrowing her eyes at me as if she was trying to warn me to be quiet. But I knew I was right. I had the answer, and she didn't, and neither did the police. She'd been too stupid to see Thomas for what he really was. She was going to know the truth now. Everyone was. I wasn't going to just cross the thin blue line, whatever that was. I was going to jump right over it and pay Thomas and Maylie back. I am smarter than you because I know who the invisible thief is, I said, folding my arms right back at them. I've seen him and I know how he turns all the lights and cameras off. I saw him do it. No way! He can't have! Yeah, it's a lie! He never did! What an idiot! Officer Miriam stepped forwards through all the whispers. Did you see something, Hector? She asked. Hector, warned Mrs. Vergra, this is no time to lie. I am not a liar, I cried out, sitting up straighter in my chair. I was there Saturday, Piccadilly Circus, skateboarding, and I saw him. But he didn't see me. Ask Will, I added, pointing to Will. We took the bus in the city and I stayed behind on my own, and that was when I saw the thief take the bow thing from the statue on the fountain. Everyone turned to look at Will, who instantly turned a bright shade of grape green. We went there, he stuttered, nodding. The two officers frowned at him and then looked at each other, and when they'd finished, they turned to Mrs. Vergra. Mrs. Vergra, if you don't mind, we'd like to take this young man out into the hall and ask him a few questions. Of course, Mrs. Vergra said. Hector, she added, making my name into one long sigh. Off you go. I stood up slowly, screeched my chair extra hard as I tucked it under the desk. I could tell the whole class thought that I was messing around. But I wasn't. As I followed the officers out of the room, I grinned extra wide, especially at Maylie's shocked face, ready to prove just how much smarter than everyone else I really was. Chapter 12. Hercules and the Toy-lets. By the time the final bell for home time rang, every teacher and every kid in every year knew that I had been taken out of the class by the police. I could have easily told them all exactly what I had said to the police, but I knew it would be a lot more fun to keep it a secret. See, secrets, they give you power, just as long as you don't give them away too soon. Mrs. Vergra and Mr. Lancaster and some of the older kids were already looking at me different, and I wanted to keep it that way for as long as I could. So, come on then, what did you see? Asked Will, catching up with me as I rushed out of the playground. Behind us, kids from the lower years, who were usually too frightened to come close to me, were hurrying after us, trying to eavesdrop. Yeah, why didn't you tell us anyway? Added Katie, clutching her rucksack straps as she jogged up to us. I'll tell you everything tomorrow, I promised, as I broke out into a run. I needed to get to the park as soon as I could to see if the police had listened to me and had gone to arrest Thomas. Wait, shouted Katie, why can't you tell us now? I've got to go home, I yelled back. I'll tell you tomorrow. Ignoring the stares from everyone standing outside the McEwen shop and the deep frown that Mr. McEwen was giving me, I sprinted at top speed across the big road and into the park. I looked around, expecting to see bright yellow police tape and vans with flashing lights and officers crawling all across the park like a billion black ants. But things in the park were about as boring and as normal as always. People were walking children home from school and pushing prams and playing with their dogs and jogging like puffing machines. There wasn't a single police officer or van anywhere. Hey! Shouted a breathless voice from behind me. I turned round and it was Maylie. She'd obviously run all the way from school because her face looked like someone had thrown a wet towel at it. What did you say to the police? She demanded, gripping her stomach. You didn't tell them it was Thomas, did you? I gave her a scowl. What's it to you if I did or didn't? Maylie shook her head. You're so stupid. You know it wasn't him. He was lying, I argued back. I know what I saw. Maylie clutched her sides even tighter, just like I did whenever we had to run too many circles in PE. Then, without saying another word, she bolted off towards the lake. Realising what she was planning on doing, I raced after her, both of us reaching the army of oak trees at exactly the same time. Thomas was there, in the very same place we'd left him yesterday, sitting outside his tent, reading a book that was nearly as old and as brown as he was. "Thomas!" cried Maylie as we both ran up to him. He looked at us, his bushy eyebrows separating like two hairy caterpillars crawling across each other. "Hello," he said, with a smile followed by a frown. The smile was for Maylie, and the frown and the soft growling that came with it was for me. "Everything okay?" Maylie shook her head and pointed at me. "He's told the police that you're the invisible thief and that they're going to come and get you and arrest you, make you go to jail. You have to get away from here." "What?" cried Thomas, dropping his book. 3 more creases appeared on his forehead. "Why would you do that?" "Because I told you. I saw you," I said, feeling triumphant. "You were lying down in a doorway and I was at the bus stop opposite. You didn't see me, but I saw you. I saw everything you did. You held up some remote control thing to turn the lights off, and then you climbed up the fountain and you sawed off the statue." "I've already told you that wasn't me." "Wait, you really saw one of the robberies?" asked the old man, his eyes widening so much that they made the bags under his eyes half disappear. "You saw the thief?" "Yes, I saw you," I repeated. "Look, you little menace," said Thomas, getting to his feet and hurriedly packing everything into a huge black rucksack that was almost as tall as I was. "I don't know who you saw, but it wasn't me. And it wasn't anyone who's ever been homeless. None of us who've lived on the street would spray our code around the way this thief is doing. You're more stupid than I took you for if you think any of us have the tools to steal a banana from a fruit farm, let alone a public statue piece of art." Stopping his packing for a moment, the old man looked at me from my shoes to my eyes and added, "Then again, maybe you are more stupid than you look." "You're just mad because I figured it out," I added. Hoisting his bag onto his shoulder, the old man looked at me and whispered, "You figured out wrong, boy." "I'm so sorry, Thomas," said Maylie, who was looking as if she was about to cry. "It's all my fault. I should never have brought him here." "Not to worry, my girl," said the old man as he tapped her gently on the cheek. "I should think I'd be used to it by now. Everything that goes wrong anywhere, somehow it's always got to be our fault. Look, you tell your dad to let everyone know. There's a spot going here for a while, eh?" he added, nodding at the tent. "Wait!" I said, trying to think of some way of keeping him in the park. If he left and the police couldn't find him, no one would know it was me who'd caught him. "The police are already on their way. If you run now, it's only going to make things worse." "Take my chances then." "Thanks," replied Thomas as he tucked his wallet safely in his coat. "You tell your mates in the police. Good luck for me. And in the meantime, I advise you to go and get your eyes tested." As he walked away, Mei-Li gave me a look which told me that as much as she hated me before, she hated me 1,000,000 times more now. But I wasn't ready for when she stepped forwards. With a loud grunt that sounded like a scream cut short, and she just pushed me to the ground. I stared up at her, too shocked to say anything, and before I could get back up, she'd run out of the trees and vanished into some blinding tunnel of sunlight that the old man had walked into too. I got up, hurried up out of the trees to follow them, but they disappeared into crowds of dogs and people and joggers and cyclists. I had no idea which way they'd gone. The park was too big and had too many exit gates. There was nothing I could do, so I just walked home, hating Mei-Li for ruining everything for me. "Hector! Is that you?" shrieked my mum as soon as I opened the front door. She was hovering in the corridor like a traffic warden, waiting to give someone a parking ticket. I wanted to ask her who she thought it was going to be, but I could tell right away that wouldn't be a good idea, and she looked angry. Helen poked her head out of the living room and watched from a safe distance. "Hector, maybe you can tell me why I got a call today right in the middle of an important meeting with the news that my son was being interviewed by the police. The police! I stood quietly and waited. If you interrupted Mum when she was shouting at you, it made it go on for longer. I cannot believe that you would come up with some story about seeing a crime and then lie to the police about it. Do you know how serious this is? I didn't, I said, slipping past her and running up the stairs. I didn't lie. You get back here right now, shouted Mum, ignoring what I'd just said. She was angry, but not angry enough to follow me up the stairs. You wait until your dad gets home, young man. This is the last straw. I am sick to the back teeth of having to try and make excuses for you. Always worrying about what trouble you're going to get into next. I slammed my bedroom door shut and chucked my rucksack onto the floor, but straight away I heard footsteps outside and a loud, annoying knock. Before I could even answer it, my door swung open, making me wish for the millionth time that I had been allowed to have a lock on it. It was Helen, looking redder and spottier than ever. Go away, I warned. Did you really tell the police you saw the thief? She asked. Yeah, I said. So? You do know that you can get locked up in prison for lying to the police, right? She said, putting her hands on her hips. It's called obstruction of justice. I am not lying, I said, pushing her out of my room and closing the door on her face. You'll see. Yeah, well, don't expect me to help you if you are, shouted Helen through the door. Like you ever would, I shouted back. I could hear her footsteps as she stomped downstairs. My stomach was growling at me, so I pulled out my stash box and sitting down at my desk, I started to munch on an extra large chocolate nut bar and a packet of onion rings. As I switched on my computer and poured the last crumbs of the crisps straight into my mouth, my bedroom door swung open again. I got ready to yell at Helen to get out, but it was Hercules. He was playing his favourite game of pretending to be jumping on an imaginary pogo stick. For some reason, he had a line of glitter joining up his eyebrows. Boing, 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 he announced, bouncing in a circle around me. Hector, look, this is an extra boing! And climbing up onto my bed, he began to jump up and down on my pillows. Oh, stop it, I said, feeling annoyed. Get down and go away. Boing, 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 he replied, jumping higher. I stretched out my hand and pushed Hercules away. But I pushed him harder than I meant to, and instead of landing safely on the floor, he fell sideways off the bed, and he bumped his head against the wardrobe. He turned red and began to cry loudly, sticking his fingers in his mouth, something he only did when he was really hurt. Shh! I said, sorry, Hector, Hercules, I'm really sorry, okay? I rubbed his arms the way that Lisa did when he fell down. You pushed me! Wailed Hercules, still crying. I didn't mean to, I said, listening for the sound of Lisa or Mum running up the stairs. Look, I went on, pulling my stash box out. You can take anything you want, okay? But you've got to stop crying. Sucking on his fingers extra hard for a few seconds, Hercules gulped down his tears as I checked his head. There was a tiny bump rising out the side of it like a bread roll. I promised myself that if it went down quickly and I didn't get caught, I wouldn't ever push Hercules again. Can I have this one? He asked, looking at me with watery eyes and pointing to the only remaining caramel-covered chocolate nut bar, something that I'd normally never give him. Sure, I said, ripping it open for him. Hercules took the chocolate bar and a handful of other sweets and, climbing back onto my bed, began chomping his way through everything as if nothing had ever happened. I turned to my computer, feeling thankful that Dad had given me the new password for being so good and doing such a good job at Mrs. Saunders' house, even though I hadn't spent more than half an hour with her, really. All she'd wanted was for me to dig up some weeds, and I'd done it so super fast that even I couldn't believe it. I pulled on my headphones to drown out the sounds of rustling packets and Hercules munching like a hamster, and I got ready to find out what the signs that the thief had used actually meant. Dad had said you could only understand them if you knew the secret code, but I was sure the code would be online somewhere. As I clicked on the search bar on the top of my screen, Hercules called out, Look, Hector! Putting dots of melted chocolate all over his face and nose with his pudgy finger, he explained, I'm Helen. I gave him a grin and said, yeah, you do look like her now. Look, you should go and show her. I'll go and show her right now. But he shook his head and, climbing down from the bed, came and stood next to me to make car noises instead. I typed in, homeless, thief, yellow signs. And we watched together as various images flooded the screen. There were the 3 diagonal lines that I'd seen being sprayed on the fountain at Piccadilly Circus, the large circle that had been left at Selfridges, a sign that looked a bit like the head of a spear that had been sprayed at Paddington Station, and the drawing of like a posh hat that had been left at the feet of Peter Pan's statue. None of the descriptions under the pictures said anything about what they were supposed to mean. As I zoomed out to the image of Peter Pan's statue, Hercules giggled and pointed at my computer, whispering, huh? Toilet! Don't be silly, I told him. It's not a toilet. Hercules pointed at it again, saying, yes, 'tis. I know how to spell it. Lisa teach me. Toilet. Toilet. I leaned forward to see what he was pointing at. It was a sign shaped like a white flag hanging on the building next to the Peter Pan Hospital, which said spaces to let in giant red letters. And above the red letters was a symbol of 2 bright blue dragons breathing fire, standing on either side of the words Lordship London Properties. It doesn't say toilet, I explained. It says to let. It's a sign for people who want to rent space and things. But Hercules had toilets on the brain, and as I scrolled through more pictures about the robbery, he shouted toilets at every single one of them. Then he got bored, ran back downstairs to show Helen the chocolate version of her spotty face, and even after Hercules left and I could concentrate again, I couldn't find any information about what the coded messages meant. So, giving up, I switched over to my game and I began taking over just as many universes as I could instead.